Ahoy! We have an absolutely insane amount of changes coming to New World, and we're not even going to be able to fit all of that in one video today, there's going to be two. And this is the first one talking about all the gearing changes, the leveling, the progression, and everything that comes with that, because that alone is completely insane. They flipped the entire game upside down. Let's begin with the whole expertise, gear score, leveling, attribute side of things. The expertise system is getting removed. They said the barrier that you hit once you reach level 60 isn't fun, so now the drops will be based on the type of content that you're clearing. More on that in just a second when we get to gear score. The annoyances that come with the umbral shard system were also pointed out, saying that you kind of get anxiety over spending umbral shards on non-BiS gear because it's not really worth upgrading, or maybe it is, and as such there will now be no extra resource to level gear up. Keep in mind that minus the expertise part, that's kind of how it used to be on level 60 originally. If you had something drop between 590 to 600 gear score, you would hope for it to be 600, otherwise you would not be able to upgrade it. But it's not quite the same, because there are some things that are different about the high end of gear score. So the new maximum is 700 gear score, but any gear between 675 and 700 will roll legendary. So as far as I understand it, you could have a 695 gear piece that would still have the same perk as a 700 gear piece, and the main difference here would be slightly less attributes. In the expansion content itself, so mainly in First Light, the natural drops will be between 625 and 700 gear score, depending on the exact area. The odds to actually get 700 gear score are decided by the type of content that you do. So the highest odds at the top end currently are if you do M3 mutations, which will be the highest new level, where you get gear between 695 and 700 gear score. Keep in mind that according to the devs, the M3 difficulty also requires 700 gear score, so you're basically just looking to min-max your pieces with better perks at that point. Other content will have different gear score drop ranges depending on the difficulty of the content. So without knowing any specifics, I would imagine something like War, for example, would also have a relatively top-end pool. But keep in mind that a lower pool doesn't necessarily mean that you can't reach 700. So I could, for example, imagine something like Outpost Rush have a lower starting point, but also reach up to 700 potentially. You just have to get more lucky. The level cap is increased to 65, but they're not seeing this as a major grinding factor. They say you hit this very naturally through the new content. You will gain additional attribute points via leveling and via gear score. Regarding attributes, they also said that the top end gear will give you more attribute bonus points than other items. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. Like, of course it will give you more, but is it going to be more in an exponential form? However it is, they said that you will have on average 600 attribute points in total instead of the previous 500. There will also be new attribute capstones at both 350 attribute points and at 25. They said they want to open up options for more experimental builds, so this could be very interesting because depending on how good a perk is for a particular build, it could be worth investing those 25 points into an attribute that your weapons don't even scale with. I've been toying around with a dex build that uses the 50 int perk lately, and 45 points feels like a bit too steep of an investment, but 20 points could be fine. The next announcement will fundamentally change how you farm loot or even open loot caches. So they say that currently the game has way too much bloat when it comes to drops. You're getting 40 to 50 items per expedition, which forces you to sift through them and turns into an unfun inventory management minigame. We will now get less loot, but it will matter more and be higher quality. I'm very happy about that. I've been saying for ages that basically you spend 1/3 of your game time sorting through your inventory, so hearing that we're getting a reduction here but better stuff instead, very, very good. So how do we actually get better stuff? They're introducing something called loot biasing. You will get loot that is more meaningful to you based on your current attributes, your weapons, and your equip load. So for example, a light spear user would get more dex gear, more light armor, and more spears. If you run multiple builds, you can force this bias, which I think is extremely cool. So if you equip another loadout, say a mage build, and open for example OPR or war caches, then the loot in those caches will immediately have the bias of the gear that you're currently wearing and the attribute points that you've currently spent. I think this is a fantastic opportunity if you quickly want to test a new build. You just save up a few caches and then you put on gear that is similar to whatever you want to run, and you will get the kind of gear that you need. Of course, this wouldn't be all best in slot perfect gear, but it would be a very easy way to get a base pool of items that you can work with. There will still be at least some specific named gear with specific perks, so it's not like you're never getting any other gear at all, but gearing for your own role will become more efficient. And in that context, we also have the perk rework to actually make your gear more useful. Remember how when this first was announced, a lot of people were like, yeah, health is just gonna be the new resilient, everyone's gonna run health? Think again, it looks like that may not be the case. So they checked the use rates and effectiveness of various perks and decided to remove some of them, change some, and add some. For example, siphoning was outright removed, and so were ward, resilient, and bane, in case you don't know yet. The goal that they have is that you shouldn't feel like an item isn't useful just because it doesn't have that one specific perk that you always need, like it used to be the case for ward and resilient. And one of these specific perks that they mentioned here as one of the new options is an absolutely massive one. Plus fire damage on your armor. So a perk that you could previously only get in your ring, likely in a dialed down version of that, will now be available on your armor, and I feel like a lot of people will prefer that over a little bit more health. We can safely assume that the same type of perk will also be available for other types of elemental damage, maybe even for other forms of physical damage. If the perks are balanced well against each other, then in PvP this will absolutely lead to some back and forth. Do you want fire damage? Do you want health? Do you want freedom? Do you want elemental aversion? Already 4 perks here that you need to make a decision between. In PvE it seems likely that the damage perks would be favored. We'll have to see more about the details. Again, we don't know everything about all of the perks, so I don't want to make any early judgment here yet. We also have something called Magnify now, which is, as far as I understood it, an attribute that changes based on what your highest attribute is. So if you have 300 strength and 200 con, then this would give you extra strength. But if you have more con than strength, it would give you extra con. They mentioned this as a perk on the item. It's a bit confusing to me. It may play into the artifacts that we'll get to a little bit later, but it's definitely an interesting mechanic to make gear better all-rounders. They're also doing more ability perk reworks. One that they mentioned here is accelerating traps on the musket. It still gives the same bonus movement speed, but it also applies a bleed now. Once again, I really hope that the trapper tree will be fully viable in the expansion. It would be such a cool thing to see. On the crafting side of things, we also have massive changes. Currently, crafting has a lot of RNG and you don't have a lot of control. The devs want you to be able to craft gear that means more to you. They are reducing the roll ranges and replacing them with fixed gear scores. So, for example, you would roll guaranteed 700. However, at that point you would still be gambling when it comes to the perk side of things. I'm assuming that golden scarabs will not go away completely, so you could probably roll with that, but you wouldn't have a locked third perk that way. However, there is a way to get exactly the item you want down to every single perk. So there are 2 new items that have different effects. The first one is the Azoth Inductor. This gives you a bonus to gear score, so it guarantees the top end gear score and lets you craft a very powerful item. The other one is the Prismatic Scarab, which is the enhanced version of the Golden Scarab. This lets you craft exactly the item you want, I think in terms of perks, but on a set cadence, so with some form of cooldown. As such, you will be able to craft best in slot a lot more cheaply. But keep in mind that 675 is enough to get all slots, so the Prismatic Scarab alone does not seem to guarantee 700 gear score. However, you can combine the Azoth Inductor and the Prismatic Scarab, and then you can guarantee 700 gear score as well as all of the perks that you want. I'm assuming the cooldown for this will be fairly long, and these resources will probably not be easy to get. Maybe they might not even be tradable. In a previous dev talk, they also hinted at items like these being possibly bind on pickup, so they're just crafted for yourself. The cooldown alone will probably prevent people from easily just getting the perfect gear right away, but there's more that will prevent you from getting best in slot from crafting alone, and that is through the ways in which they're changing the item chase. Currently, best in slot 3 perkers aren't specific to any content. You can get them anywhere. Sure, they're very hard to get, but you can craft the same item that you can find in a dungeon unless it's an illegal perk combo, so there isn't really any specific place you go to do a specific thing. Now, the devs are creating new chase items that will have impactful and unique perks. These are called artifacts. So artifacts will always be 700 gear score, and they will be playstyle and build defining. They can drop from named enemies, dungeons, or even the PvP reward track, so different places for different items here. In the post yesterday they already mentioned that these can have up to 6 perks, and let's look at these unique perks a little bit. One example is Scorpion Sting. This is a spear that has Javelin as a perk, but it has a javelin that pulls enemies to you. Get over here! Sorry, I was morally obligated to do that as a Mortal Kombat enjoyer. A lot of the perks for the item are initially locked behind a quest. For example, you get an objective like Kill Thorpe in the Depth, and then it unlocks the perk immediately after you do that. I really hope that one of these Scorpion Sting quests isn't kill Scorpio 10 times, because I can't do that again. You can have 3 artifacts equipped at the same time on your weapon, your armor, and your jewelry. So there will be absolutely insane mixes possible if the other perks from gear are anything like this example. We also get some more examples. The wall is a tower shield with enhanced sturdy blocking, and it also takes 25% less damage from elemental attacks. But it has a trade-off. In return, you cannot dodge. Now the big question with the wall for me is, does that count as a weapon or an armor? Because in some ways shields are counted as armor, and in others they are counted as weapons. So that's also going to be interesting. Another example is the BiS, and this one honestly scares me a little bit, which is a great axe that scales off int and deals pure void damage. I ran a very niche build back in the day when Void Gauntlet and Ice Gauntlet were kind of popular, which was Void Gauntlet Great Axe, because the utility you could get from both of them combined was absolutely insane. You had great setup, great debuffing, and a decent escape. The main thing that held that build back was that even with an int gem, the damage on the Great Axe was kind of lackluster. With this one, that wouldn't be an issue. Of course, metas have changed drastically since then, so what I did back then wouldn't really apply today, but even other combinations like Great Axe Ice Gauntlet, which was used with 0 int for just pure Ice Gauntlet utility, would gain more value through this. Wars will probably be a bit hectic, and if other artifacts are like this, then so will the rest of the game. And to top all of these new systems off, you also get Weapon Mastery roughly 30% faster now, especially on the levels from 15 to 20, so that we'll be able to level the flail quickly as well when it comes out. And speaking of the flail, guess what else we have information about? That will come later today, so if you'd like to see the second video, stay tuned for that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell if you haven't yet, so you get notified when it comes out. And after that we have even more expansion stuff to talk about. Also, if you want to get early trading tips, I will be posting one today about the stuff that we're hearing about, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Duke Sloth, out.